Let us cultivate the altruistic motivation or bodhicitta motivation, seeking complete enlightenment for the benefit of all other kind mother sentient beings. And with that kind of at least contrived motivation or bodhicitta, that we should participate in this Lamrim teaching, Lamrim discourse on the stage of the path to enlightenment. I'm going to read a couple of pages from the Lamrim Chemo, volume number 3 in the English translation of Lamrim Chemo, page 274, to give you the blessing of lineage oral transmission, followed by explication. And those who are using electronic version, so we are a little above the subpoint B, which reads which systems to follow so as to develop the view in your mind stream. Not yet there, almost.
Jesus Baba Chigi Mewe Tsi Ni Keda Wacho De Do Lungu Neva Ne Ni Galo Trebe Lungu Ne Gona Maya De Una Chishen Rang La Trebe Gone Jang Yin O Rang Ye To Yi Zo Baba Ne Tangi De Rang La Trebe Nye Ne Maya Ni Gala Trebe Ne Maya No Ting Ye Shira To Ki Tse Ni Je Ba Ye Je Ba Ye No Je Ba Ne Gu Ba Me Ban Ba Yi Sanje na jara chita chabi teba de kona mashi de chichula penda wa che 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 so de na sheba ta sa me go ji ga la no chube ta ji ju jo ju ba la rong ji je ta de ti me do ba chi go shin la chabi se so je ju che ju ba la ten ju wa jo ba de ni lo mo ju mo shin de so yi no ni ba ni te ni mushi di ni so di ni sui je so zhang ni dao ji le jie wo ne te ta pa pa ye se je ji de zhang wi o mo ba qian bo de rang ge lu men zhao wa ni ye na yang te ta kang ge ji de zhang yao na de ne ten ju lu ge ji de zhe wo yin de nga la xie ba ta de ye rang wo ni wo zhe bi ye zhang xin guo ba dang de ge ba la kun de yin na xia de ji le ba ra rong wa xie Gwe Tsu Ti Ni Tsu Ti Ni La Min Nyeba Nyeba Shao Ngo Nyeba Shao Ngo Na La Wa Ra Ngo Zhe Be Ra Shi Khe Le Ne Yin Chi Je Be Ri Be Je Be Ta De Ri Be Je Be Da Ri Be Je Be Ri Be Je Be Ri Be Je Be Ta Ba Jo Ba Lo Bu De Ni Je Xiong Le Mang Du So Ma Na Pa Pa Ye Se Je Xiong De Xie De Zhe Ba Ra Dong Ye Lu De He Na Te Da Yin Na Yang Ga Ra Xie Ba Ta Ra Ge Ba Ra Tian Ju Ji Shuo Ke La Go Ba Na Ngo Sum Ba Xi Ba Te La Te Ne Da Ji Le Je Be Su La Sum Kasa do we da ba do she da de la ba da da de kong be zhe bong shi lo dang bo le su Kasa ra xi me ba de la ba ba wo ti ye ri ba yang rang yi me ba zhe ba de ba ri ba de na ba xian la jia wei cu lo dang bo le ni bei ge ba do dang ba jia wo dang bo ni Zhong zhe du do zhang ba le da jie xiao du ji sim jian ne da jie ba yi Geshe Bon De Dong De La Sim Je Yo Ma Ye Zhe Na Zhe La De Ne Xin Da Yo Di Ye Bu Na Gu Zhe Se Ye Zhe Wo Xie Zhe Ge Ye La La Kho Lo Lo So La De Ne Xing Da Do Be Ren Se Bong Bong Na La De Ne Jia Da Ge Me Sim Je Da Ba Song Ba Da Ge Me Sim Je Da Ba Song Ba Sum Be Tong Ma So Tong Ma Xing De Bei Xie Ba Zhe Xiao Xing De Xie Bei Xie Ba Xiao De La Xie De La Xie Xing Da Ren Xie Me Wei Da Yong Zhou Da Yu Du Xing Da Ren Xie Me Wei Da Yu Du Dian Ba Deng De La Zhou Bong Dong Ming Ge Wei Xie Ba Jie Wo De Zhu De La De Ne Nye De Da Nye Wei Fei Yong No Tang Bu Ne Ju Ba Le Xie Da Ren La Ye Da Me Xie Me Ma Ye Zhen De Ye Me Ye Yin La La Me Yin La Sa De Me De Ba Zhe Wei Ye Me Xie Xie Da Zhe Ye La Dang Jing Ta De Da Jing Ta De So Dun Du Ye Wei Dun Du Me Wei Da Ba Zhe Me Yin Ba Xie Yin Du Ba Da 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 Pu Pu Ni Ya De Da Zhao Song Zhou De Di Xing Da Da Rang Ge Ngo Zhe Wei Ren Ye Yin Du Me Zhao Jing Dang Ta De So Nam Ba Dun Dang Ne Dun Dun Dang 다번 바드다 강로는 저나지 리베 도고베 도모다 강데 데 마르베샤라지베 데라 싱데 라 시네 소싱다 콜로다 콜로타 세르블로소 싱데이나 데다라 신제바르 지마이데 지제 지이나 이나 데노 남 토마이바 신데 싱데 원조 싱다지 바시데 남자지예도 저와다 쇼보쇼 레정제도 조소 주정이랑에나 땅 모두베 소소멘데 이나마 부바다 남비신도 예도 연가와 소소라 미바를 저와레 마미비 셔 미번 저와레 미비 맘미 미바를 저와레 마미 셔 마미 셔도 답이 저메원제 저 텐데 텐비 쇼니네 가숑라 야시 가숑 쇼 네와도나 나무지 데르메데 렌델라 티지니 보더레나 나라 데니자 메르 티니네와라 오니지 소소바이나 저발레 테미세로 데르펜주 여바선지 민고 펜주 여바선 민고 데르 테마랑 지니 저바고보 페르주니 pirju sombati yang paru borade dawara sinye de bara chube sheda ko guba de dawata je lawati jude sheba sho de be shoja me de lajin tongxin de chebe palanta de ba shin de shinda ya rang ge ya da bande baran de na ne palana da de jin so de ba de de shinda rang ge la le 소소가 지고래 데데 미지베 셔레 데데데 바 메도 시진나데 데노 시에바 따르 시바다르 신다연라다 데바 용 미레데라 런시 타데와 까베제 나옹게 카비 셔레 쳇나랑 용고니 지오저 반디 주와라 디디 테지네 라시지베 쇼이라 대양 알아가즈메제로 대양 리지 나와다 제바저 되타예데와 민고바다라 신달라양 인베라그세 예베데 망고고 쇼라마니네 케데서 저기다 주네 스우네 히나이 니 조르 예라라 예라제베데 예라 거지레 라제메 라도 메베예서 신다제 만셰바다 예라서바데 라게 예비체바제 시저 조보 니소 다만 저 대거를 거르래도 세네 디인베데 더 롱그너와 니가를 제베 코네 니가를 제바 코네 고네 마인데 어느 지시나 롱라 제베 고네 장 마인 롱그 또 이즈 바바니 탐제도 롱라 제베 니 령와 인제 신 니가를 제바 마인노 티지 지르 또베 도그 세 제바 고바요 메바 마인데 상제 제 그런데 스타트업에 TV 데코나 마시비 디지털 펜타버쇼 해송소스 티입니다. 다 건제 롱이 근데바스 커사 디다 롱이 근데바니 스타 단다시 저래나 에네 커사 롱코네 고 마인데 오늘 지게나 롱을 집에 고니 정마이노 롱이 도주서 빠바데 탐제도 롱을 저니 노아 인제 니가라 저번에 마이노 tinchir togi senyi joba goba mewa mainde sanji namji rangla sida trabe tebe tiko nashibi duje jiwala ni la pendabe sheros da kaji tere ene di tanda chabada sugi sujen to tuya karesena nigala chuje tunawa chogu mares o chuje tunawa chogu long karza 지 어느 간제에서는 wrong the trip going young man knows wrong jewel trip maris. What did the Jebashin can do Marawa? Wrong to use about when the time to the wrong the trip in Lima in Geshe, Tinda, Conje, wrong cemetery that Bongo to Bushina. In the wrong cemetery, the Shin cemetery in the Bushina, in the wrong cemetery, the Lima is that. Wrong cemetery, the one cemetery of the Euro. That Shin race and Yiming Yavaka Marawa. What this is links and temper your say there were. You got to know my nose that to know to my race. Teacher doggy saying Johnny, government mind. Sanjay and Yaran should run like that travel, Teva the corner, Mashibi, the Jeju, the Penda, Shadows. So Sanjay belong to Nasha there because and the Tago and the Direct Magician, the big tiny dinner. Panda Tonda, Sanji Shuga, and Jebashin Sungo Maris.
Gisela read from page 274, volume number 3 in the English translation, Dublin Chemo, to the top of page 280. So those who are using electronic version, we pass the caption, Analyzing a Chariot, right? So a few pages into that. That was to give us the blessing of oral transmission, right? He hasn't explained anything yet here. So we're back to where we left off last time on page 274. So there. And so some of the things that we talked about already is this, that Chandrakirti is basically telling Baba Viveka that when we use syllogistic reasoning, which consists of 3 parts, right? There is the subject or topic, we call Shöjen. There is the predicate, and then there's the reason. Okay? And so whatever is part of this whole syllogistic reasoning, that has to be kind of acceptable to both, debaters or both parties in a debate. Yeah. And the issue that he has raised already is that there is no common subject, a subject that is commonly acceptable to both sides, given that they accept intrinsic reality of existence. So therefore, we even don't have a common ground or a subject, to debate about. So if there is no common subject, well, we can't really have a syllogistic reasoning, right? That is commonly acceptable to both predicate and reason. Yeah, and so that was been talked about. So when we think in terms of what called establishing something through valid cognitions, we can think in terms of something, established by way of one's own valid cognition, that you have validly cognized something, or that it has been established by valid cognitions of others, or by both. Of course, among these things, what really makes more sense to anybody is something that's established by your own valid cognition. Then you are 100% sure that this is what it is. Rather than somebody telling you that, well, this should be valid. That may be, but we don't know yet. Yeah. So what Geshe explained is this, that Shakyamuni Buddha taught all kinds of discourses for the benefit of sentient beings. So when Buddha taught about what are the things that we should abandon or get rid of, we should not do, objects of abandonment, and what are the things that we should do or adopt or cultivate, the practice of cultivation, Buddha said that more in the sense of conventional sense, not in the sense of that there is something findable under ultimate analysis. Buddha did not present his teaching on abandonment and cultivation in the sense of like there's something really findable if you look at it, what it is. There's something. He didn't talk in that. That's not how the conventionally people talk about. People talk, So Buddha's whole teaching is based upon sort of conventional sense making, not in the sense of finding something ultimately.
대단한 해봤다고 세미고 시가지고 저다 이주자 저거 랑주다 rongi yi da dang. Ti chuba shigo xe la chabi susum rupcha chuba la, ten juwa joba ni lobun ji gomba shindi sewa yin na wasi. Ti me da kanji kisi ni da kaji zuda rongi ba da ten juwa tong xe di ni, ti da tini ma zuwa da yada yung rawa. Da ronglu kare se ten yin se wari. Go chigo niga seme ene, da yi rupcha shishin tunan du yoba si, da kanji tisgo rong juyu la ma juyu seme shishin takzu tongzu chogu ya shije. Ode da juyu la chuna la, ene karsa, inji minji juyu la ma juyu seme chogu re si, o tak tere gura si yinde rangi ba she. Ti cho mogo she, ene shenra ka tenzi zang jiga re si yinde, ene da tenjo wa yisi. Ti ima de da gombo liru gomba shendi so, da daya ma deshi riba jawang de zang, ene gombo liru gomba de karik parzo, o tele pagu dosi.
The Rangi Basidio Ganla, Samayina, Rang Juguila Matuba Kirba,
Ore,
Zigo Second Rangi Bares.
ore.
The Tinjuba in a Shenda Sidigan, Kazan, young Shenda.
Shenda se de shenda chakwa se de zang, shenda se de shenda chakwa mo so so da ke me le me se, tire kai ma re si war wa, da shenda se de zang la, tire jeba me.
Turn on the Dube get the Tasman,
Oh, da tuno.
Dayan Darich.
Oh, shenda se tuno ma re.
Algonda.
Tuno se de chosi yin de rong ju ro wa.
Alone.
ro wa. Da tenjo se chi tuno de chogo ma re.
Alone.
Ko jeba ma je ji ding pe ju so tong bi da to se o da se le shan. Chu dong jo ro wa. O de la. Kare shenda ge den.
Shenda Ale Shenda Long.
O de da. Se de shenda de li go ne pe lo to se ya de dung ge de tenjo she. ene susum rangmu chwa se nan de ge ga ji juil ma ju shi ba chok se ya go ti de de ge de ene rang ji ba se ge res o da di ti de re sha se ti de yin ba de da gu de ro pe go ma ne ti re sha se wa da yin ma je ba shi ni yong de wa
Ala Bande Dabe Song So as part of our this whole debate or argumentation, what we have seen is that critics, they kind of advocated their view of, distinction between Savatandika Madhyamikans and Prasangika Madhyamikans. And Chandrakirti, kind of critiques that, your distinction is really not working. Okay? Although you claim that distinction is how Nagarjuna has differentiated between Savatandika Madhyamikans, Uma Rangyuba, and Prasangika Madhyamikans, Uma Thengyuba, but you really did not get it right, so to speak. But how did Nagarjuna differentiate between Savatandika Madhyamikans and Prasangika Madhyamikans, according to Chandrakirti, is this: that Savatandika Madhyamikans, are those who assert what is known as autonomous syllogistic reasoning. Something really has to exist intrinsically. Something has to be findable, right, under analysis. And based upon that kind of assertion, so they claim that a valid cognition has to be unmistaken with regards to its main object or jugul in Tibetan. Yeah, so those who believe in that kind of a viewpoint or assertion, these are, we can say, Savatandika Madhyamikans. Yeah. Now, Prasangika Madhyamikans are the ones who kind of go more with what is renowned to the world, so to speak. That means what is conventionally acceptable to the world, which in other words means that Prasangikas do not feel that in order to establish valid cognition, we necessarily have to assert that something is intrinsically findable under analysis. There's no such thing. Conventionally speaking, people just talk in a normal conventional sense, what is or what is not. So Buddha taught his teachings on abandonment and cultivation in that sense, not in the sense of, there's something intrinsically to be abandoned. There's something intrinsically need to be cultivated, adopted. There's something there, really, Buddha did not think. He just talked in a sort of conventional sense. So those who go along with that kind of a notion, what is renowned, conventionally, so these are, we can say, Prasangika Madhyamikans.
这他你把提水就是让的，到去了结完的，提他泡泡也是就是这，我们把全部他提上路，门照年年的呀，提他可能就是让人那天有路的，就是肉吧人弄，提了一下看见，他提这那我们这就是我们在上去的天就些那路水全部年月人呢，那到去了结的咱他可的路线的也好的是呢，提没啥，偏连着可是呢。现在提到就是让看就是这样，那天就路的，就是如果人多，他为什么可能路开的是呢？天就路的意思。第一个问题这个是呢，我写话他也让生意这个让英国话当，这个话来那，可能南下他就六百，那开始600容是个别，处的也不是，也不是。可是，确定也不是，确定也不少些。现在的，可是那让就那些让生意这边给学校呢，那电电里头我们开始平时对面些多是吧？这些呢，现在电电里头我们看见，我就是到有这种可能天就路就是那个呀，可是现在让就那些呢。那下季都这个问题，可是下季这个太阳着我，那这面太阳着，可是听着弄松啊。他天就路的那在中站的没些，大可能我那都听下，现在体验上，接着为地路是个意思的。
So at the bottom of page 274, subpoint B reads, which system to follow so as to develop the view in your mind stream? So this is basically asking the question, okay, now, well, there seems to be two different viewpoints here. One, that of the Savatandika Madhyamigans, both are Madhyamigans, middle view philosopher, and the other Prasangika Madhyamigans, right? So if the question we ask is, okay, so which of these two views should I cultivate in my mind, right? I need an answer here, right? And so here Jeremiah gives his answer. Of these two viewpoints or the systems, if you will, he follows that of the Prasangika Madhyamigans. Jeremiah finds that more acceptable and feasible. And he gives his reasons why he thinks that's the case. Because according to Jeremiah, if we go with Savatandika Madhyamigans' viewpoint, which is that something exists intrinsically, right? Intrinsically findable, then things could not be exist dependently. Things could not be dependent arising. If you say something exists intrinsically in and of itself, then the dependent arising does not make sense, so based upon that intrinsic existence, Jeremiah thinks that then all the things that we accept in the world, whatever it is, and all the things, how they function, all of those, could not be possible if something were to exist, intrinsically. And as part of refuting intrinsic existence, what we have seen is that if things were to exist intrinsically, are they identically one, right? Are they one and the same thing? If they are, then there cannot be distinction and differentiation among things. Right? Because there should be 100% one and the same thing. But if you claim that things are different, things are distinctive in nature, intrinsically, then those things cannot have any kind of relationship with each other. Right? We cannot assert something exists in relation to something else, because everything must exist in and of itself, and everything has nothing to do with any other things, because you are completely autonomous and independent in and of yourself, right? So then things become unrelated, and that's also not feasible. And so if we look at how everything actually exists, we call it the ultimate reality. If we do the fact-checking, so to speak, with that, according to Jeremiah, things exist dependently. So the dependent existence precludes intrinsic reality existence. So therefore, for him, what makes more sense and feasible is Prasangika's viewpoint, and that's what we should cultivate in our mind stream.
인주집에 릭배 딱바 줘봐 로봉 대년지 형래 몽도 송바 남 파바 yap세지 형남다 현디 저바 통해 로드 켈렌라 다 유대직 되래야 대모버듯이 다다 랑주 나시시 켈나 에네텔 릭배너 마몬 주오리스 다와자바다 로봉디 인시디 페이지 되면 다와자바다 상예장지로와 다와자바다 상예인 장인 송시베 대소디 에네 파바 yap세 형다다 고불로다 안데 형다 시다 튀볼 튀셔도 없어 어디 튀시고자 현대 저바 통해 로드 켈렌라 스타 당기 유진의 찍히다디 유진이 바데 데레도 말때 그게 가자 야 파발로다 아야들 신고서는 맞으면서 나타와서 상유장의 해야돼 다 링딘 라서 해야돼 스팅도나 이네 나타와서 상유장 해야돼 팅치고도 셰다 켈레베 수사리
So on top of page 275, this is under the caption, which system to follow so as to develop the view in your mind stream. And the second reason given there is, according to Gyeltsen, explanations provided by the two masters, meaning Chandrakirti and Buddhapalita, their explanation through scrutiny and analysis, accords with the viewpoint of Arya Nagarjuna and Arya Deva. Okay? If you look at Baba Viveka's illustration of the middle way, or so to speak, according to Gyeltsen, that is, that does not accord with what Arya Nagarjuna and Arya Deva have, explained in their treatises. So it's not like in the sense of Gyeltsen, it's kind of taking side with Chandrakirti and Buddhapalita, because he likes them or whatever other reasons, But he said, if you really compare and contrast, so to speak, do the comparative study of Baba Viveka's explanation of the middle way, right, or the ultimate reality, and Chandrakirti and Buddhapalita's, illustrations of the ultimate reality, and which one really accords with Nagarjuna and Arya Deva's viewpoint. He said it is Chandrakirti and Buddhapalita. So therefore, they represent the Prasangika viewpoint, and I, agree with that.
대다이는 셰와다는 예버天주이 쇼 계랑고 나고 세다 제다 유진 될 때네 이는 가는 베게 다 제르버지 메 셰바디디 베지 당분이天주이 쇼도 신이 시다 베지 선고로 와 세다 가 셰와 나시신 이니 天주이 계랑고도 안타가서 天주이 신고시베 소리 모임시 리름의 타니 신은 天주이 야도 소
And so at the end, Lama Tsongkhapa says, seeing that the texts of the Noble Father and his spiritual son are in complete agreement on this, I accept that system. Accordingly, it is apparent that you should accept the Prasangika position as explained above. So what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying is that if you really follow the analysis and reasoning as it is, then he said, I find Chandrakirti and Buddhapalita's explanation of ultimate reality as in agreement with Nagarjuna and Arya Deva, and therefore I have accepted it. And this is why Gyeltsen, usually explains things more from the Prasangika system or perspective, because that he finds it, acceptable or more feasible, at least than the Baba Viveka's perspective.
다 숨바 쉐바들 때네 다 줄을 제외 출을 숨 간사 다음에 때네 봐 쉐이 다음에 때네 봐 대다 알라 콤베 대다 콤베 제오본 수스 다들 숨바 쉐바들 때네 숨 다들이야지 사이즈 숨바들 강지 쉐바스데 다들다 랑지 다세 제다 현자 다세 인셰다 단데 이 현자 다세 때네 이 다 때네 보고 레스고로 다 쉐바들 때네 and Julia was delta, Saji didn't so muse, Judilla. Consa diamond and Papashi, Dripachi, she diamond and Papashi, and 电的话几个人嘛吧，他这呀，你电的话前面多，电的可能要帮，是说呢，希腊从这些的，可能呢这把帮我是吧？我的这说没有是不是？
So now the caption reads, analyzing a chariot. And so the subpoint number 3 reads, how to use that procedure to generate the right philosophical view within your mind stream. Okay? And so that has 3 subpoints on its own. The number 1 is establishing the selflessness of a person, right, validly. And the second one is establishing the selflessness of phenomena. So it's not enough to establish, right, these two selflessnesses validly, but the real purpose of doing that is, we internally realize these selflessnesses so that we are able to get rid of mental obscurations within our mind, afflictive emotions, so forth. So that's the subpoint 3, right? So first we establish each of the selflessnesses of a person and of phenomena. And then the last one is now how the realization of these selflessnesses help us to get rid of afflictive emotions. Because that requires combining, as Geshe said, calm abiding, shamatha, and special insight of vipassana. Through the integration of shamatha and vipassana, calm abiding and special insight, then we can get rid of afflictive emotions.
的他同步的康萨的，就是不同步康萨单位电的泡泡的，他送同步说大上西没电的泡泡，我他这个我写，哎呢，第大个上西没把出本电吧是，他这我是康萨当时的哎呢。我让谁这把这把这的，我又让谁这把谁去效果是吧？我大概我是那，我的晓得，他同步的呀，我让伊没话就日光天，那日光天天呢，我又让伊这没话的，我是做木过些，很低做不住我是吧？我的点把些，日光天呢现在就出是，但刚才当没这个日光天去现在，高朋友老师我现在就要出，可是日光天现在就出了，我的这些。
So now we are on top of page 278. Subpoint 8 reads, how to determine that there is no self in the person. In other words, I said establishing the selflessness of a person, right? And that involves 3 sub-points. So number 1 is establishing that there is no such a thing as self of a person. Okay? So that's subpoint 1. And the subpoint 2 is relatedly, if there is no such thing as intrinsic self of a person, that's understanding, right? Then there is no such thing as intrinsic mind. Remember when we talk about self and mind, right? First, I focus on I, and then what's my, my, right? That whole thing. So if there is no such thing as intrinsic I, well, there cannot be such thing as intrinsic mind, So that the subpoint 2. And subpoint 3 is how we can apply the same lines of reasoning to other phenomena, such as pillar, vase, and others.
这打唐波打上一边说的了，唐波你别个吧些，同了教我，唐波你用这的多张吧来，打的教我对的什切呢？打教我因，对些碰不得动的，得了什么有嘛？其他人了说的，电的现在就把这些碰不能的呢，工作是不是写小写人啊？错不了，电的现在就本在呢，那碰不了电呢，看啥？大公司现在我现在大不了，送别是，通过现在白写不是，我到底得了呀，看啥单位，电别话得了，你现在人了，他对这样子我得白过一下去。现在的当我的白的，考察单位就白的，你现在个的，他对这样的中国人是不是
？So we are in the middle of page 278. So the subpoint 1, which reads actually, no, sorry, let me see. Subpoint 1. Actually determining that the self lacks intrinsic existence. This is done through two ways, by giving an example, and the example is that of a chariot, and the second one is the actual meaning, right? The example is used to demonstrate the meaning, whatever it is. Yeah? And as you can see, there is a citation from Chandrakirti's explanation of the middle way in the middle of the page. And as Geshe said, that to establish that there is no self of a person, the other way of saying is the selflessness of a person, there are many examples, but the one which is, so to speak, preferred here in this context is that of a chariot, right? Shinta, a horse-drawn cart, in other words. That's what Tibetans call it, right? So if we analyze the different parts of the chariot, right, that consists of what it is, there's a 7-part, analysis, then we can, we can start to get some sense of how there is no, intrinsic self, or there is no self of a person.
我这咱这了现在上因为大都这吧，这了这个帮吧，每个切吧有个人就别出，这了点呢，牛的到这吧，这边培养我，小弟他。这了现在别家，但我们吹下就的了，现在他听说这个是啥了，是吧？我在那里他个别吹下养做家属了，可是这个这样了，或者是这。 아니 걔다 신다가 되게 된 타든지에서 타든지에 이게 메자 신다랑 심해 대한바스 데려와 따로 된 세대다 다 거기 연애는 따로로 뭐 거지요래요 이게 메자 따로래스 다 따로래스 되선 다들이야 대기라 다 링데메 가서 어머랑이 면제디 얘기 다 되게 저와 방고 있어와 들어 저와 방 맹기 쳐가고니 드베 수서 tel teni tawa tel teni ta teni nyudu tawa ji pheon no se ode ta hingde pel teni ta pel yakshu di isi khonsa dame tel pe ya la ta di hingde pe de yakshu ni le wa sida tel teni ini khonsa dame tel phap to ni semi tro so na se tel ta ge gezen ro kari or sin ode pheon de wa.
So towards the bottom of page 278 now. Giving example, that that consists of 4 subpoints. So there's so many subpoints, so we have to keep track of everything here. So first one is showing that chariot exists imputedly without intrinsic existence. And the second one is eliminating objections to that viewpoint. And third one is how to establish the chariot under various names or labels. And the fourth one is the advantage that you find the view quickly by using this example. So now back to subpoint 1. As Geshe explained, of course, this is example is from ancient time. Of course, today we have all kinds of gadgets and technology. Probably we could, use the same thing with a car and plan and whatever. And even I will throw a computer here, right? My first footnote. But we didn't have these things, so we had chariot in the past. So there's something called 7-part analysis of a chariot. So through the 7-point analysis of a chariot, what is demonstrated is there's nothing at the end, something to be found intrinsically as like, here, the chariot, right? There's nothing, okay? So what that tells us is that a chariot is an imputed phenomenon, okay? It exists imputedly, not intrinsically, right? Because nothing is findable under the 7-part analysis here. So if we understand that example well, because this example is considered as the best example to demonstrate that there is no self of a person, no intrinsic self of a person. Okay? Then we will also be able to understand that the self of a person exists imputedly, Of course, then the second one is, of course, Sevatantika, Madhyamikans, and maybe schools below, they have a bunch of things to say about that, right? So then you have to, refute their viewpoints. So that's called eliminating objections to that, right? Whatever, their viewpoint is, we have to deal with that.
어디 다들 가르에서나 당분에 선죽벌에 힘다랑이라리 현대메시 시도 힘다대랑 연라다 에네 대세워다 랑신주베 현마이시 어디서 그러면 되지데 힘다세야데 에니 차진제 연라데 차이에서서 군이 다대정으로 뭐근데 다대에서 현마이시 시단 현 다대고 어디 디 다대데야 랑신주베 현마이시 지그래와 다 힘에 많이 된다면 힘에 많이 쓰되 찍어 말이죠. 다 될 쳐가지고 말 힘다다 연락인데 찍 말하고 어디 된다야 많이 쓰되 힘다 연락은 담바데 시다 힘다데 연락은 된거 지나 동 랑신 저버데 연락은 된거 말이지. 된다야면 연락 많이 쓰되 힘다거나 연락 많이 연락 많이 쓰되 임다 연락 많이 세디엔 자래 연락은 힘달을 때마다 힘다 연락 때문에 니스다 연락 많이 세디서는 에네 그래서 연락이 힘다 때마다 나시 저 많이 근데 힘다 연락 쓸 때에 나시 저 많이 니로 편집 때문에 초니세야죠 대화 딘서리 단 뒤바점에서도 콘도 힘의 루루신데 봉셔서 샤기는 힘다요 뭐 힘다고 랭는 뭐 힘다요 말아. 제가 네바좀 해야 돼. 그 힘자 맞지부시 연락차나데 봉셔서들 에네 되게 이 네바점시 다 예민시시는 스타디 뒤상고 예비도 힘다 득베 가서 에니 힘대 예주요 말아 sob다 중거로 와. 어디야 말이스. 어디다 넘버 뒤인데 뒤인서리.
Takin tuinte redi simena ken tangbodi.
Tobodi hinda rang yenla da ene rang yi zhe he mai ba zhe xie. Dene yenla nam termin se de dan ene hinda ko de de rang yi zhe hinda yenla rang yi zhe hinda jig mai ba ene hinda de ro 편지 때 배쇼 니로 he mai se ta de mai se da ka sa he mai 힘에 많이 쓰듯은 제 많이 봤을 타대 많이 찍어야 되와 찍 많이 봐.
찍 많이 타대면 미.
네. 이제 찍어야 돼요. 다들 그거보다 디찍들 가제 셔와 자고 뭐다 걸 힘다도 해야 돼. 타찍 많이 나고 찍 많이 봐. 뭐다 가제 셔와 자고 말아. 다니에 되고 찍 말아 봐. 뭐지? 다 근데 그래서 힘에 많이 된대야면 현실다. 아니 힘다 연락돼 봐시 예라 힘단데 편집도 좀 이요로와 어디 인가데 인데 랑시 좀 많이 쓰는 가제래서 시래
알아 찍 많이 타대 많이 땐때마다 랑시 좀 많이 시제게
시래서 다 예라데 예라라면 힘다 예라 때마당 예라 힘을 때마 편집 때문에 쇼니 써야 된다리 예라라면 예라 닥터면 써야 되리 이 초니래서 다 뒤바점시도 봉샤버디 셰. 다 예브스디 드샤티. 딘상스웨.
타겐가 두스나게. 가사다 신다데로 와게. 다 각자 맞아버체. 아니 신다 코란기 다 가서 야라다가 찍 말했어 와게. 아니 랑신르베 타데 말했어. 니로 와게. 뭐 야라다 신다니 랑신르베 타데 말했어. 데메데시로 와게. 신다 di ten ro wage ten de ten bala rangshing du be ten yo mar ser wage ten ba de ten ya rangshing du be ten yo mar ser wage de ne karsa di du ba sam de mare ser wage nga che yib de mare tru ser wage ka chik samas
yela man yema ta de pindi de be si jo ne karsa pindi de be so de demba sa idwa
ala demba de rangshing
demba sa singda yela demba
no al demba de rangshing du be ten yo mar okay, so we are on top of page 279. There is a citation from Chandrakirti's commentary on the middle way, which basically I'll read it and then translate explanation given, because that contains the 7-part analysis of the chariot. So I was trying to find that what are the 7 parts here, right? a chariot is neither asserted to be other than its parts, nor to be non-other. It does not possess them. It does not depend on the parts, and the parts do not depend on it. It is neither the mere collection of the parts, nor is their shape. It is like this, unquote, right? So if we look at a chariot, in 7 different ways, so to speak, the 7-part analysis, we find that there is nothing that is findable under analysis intrinsically. So what are the 7 parts, we're looking at? Number 1, as it says, a chariot is neither asserted to be other than its part. In other words, a chariot is none of its parts, right? Even conventionally speaking, we don't have to say intrinsically, right? A chariot is none of its parts, identical with its parts, 1. 2, a chariot and its parts do not exist intrinsically as being separate or different. Yeah? As a chariot and its parts do not exist intrinsically as being distinctive or separate. Okay? The key word is intrinsically, 2. Yeah? Number 3, because when we think of a chariot in parts, and in English word it doesn't come very eloquent, but who cares, right? We really want the meaning, right? In Tibetan it's really nice, ten, but English it's just weird, even as I say it. A chariot is the part possessor, that which possesses parts, and the parts are, what's something possessed by the by the chariot. And it's really even getting weird to say this. Let me see. So in other words, a chariot does not depend intrinsically on its parts. Number 3. Its parts do not intrinsically depend upon the chariot. Are you with me? That's 4. Okay? A chariot does not intrinsically depend upon its parts. That's 3. Number 4, its parts do not intrinsically depend upon the chariot, right? That's better to say than the part possessor and the parts, like in English, it's not working for me. It's so beautiful in Tibetan. So that's 4. Then a chariot does not intrinsically owns or possesses its parts. A chariot does not, intrinsically possesses or contains its parts. Number 5. Number 6, if we put all the different parts of the chariot together as a collection, like a heap of collection, that is not a chariot either, right? Because a chariot has to be fitted into something. Then it's a chariot. Like if you just kind of take out all the parts and then put them together as a heap, that collection is not a chariot. Number 6. Number 7, a chariot is not the shape that we look at, right? When we fit in everything, it's not that. So those are the 7 parts of a chariot. So if we go through this 7-part analysis of a chariot as an example, what we come to see is that there's nothing that is intrinsically a chariot, findable as a chariot, right? There, like, this is it, so that's just an example now.
다 걸서 다 들을 때는 어디도 어디를 쓰고 다 누지도 배는 힘다다 인데 힘대 연락이 정시 때문에 타대시 되잖아 제메도에 타대 까분나신 제메르고 제메르는 아니 힘다디 차진시 연락이 차시시는 거야 용어로 까분나이래 그 어디다 들으는 다 제와래래야 가실 거기에 채워 자고 책임자고 문도 저기 내가 뒤에 때네 이 힘다되다 배딱동선이야 민도 없이 세다나시 주문도 어찌라야 되셨다.
So the main point, is here that if we look at those 7 parts of a chariot and go through the analysis of it, except for one, where we don't need to use the qualifying intrinsic for the rest we do. What come to see is that at the end, there is nothing that's findable ultimately as the chariot. This is it, right? There's nothing findable. And as a part of that whole analysis is, as Geshe mentioned, that if a chariot and its parts were to be intrinsically different, right, distinctive, intrinsically different, then a chariot and its parts would not have anything to do with each other. They would be as different as a pillar and a vase. A vase is not a pillar and pillar is not vase, and they have nothing to do with each other. Okay? So it would have to be that if they were to be intrinsically separate or intrinsically different.
어디 매도서 될라 힘대 예라는 소행식시 콜로드 서브 라서 보고 스타 지증마고 되지야지 힘대 예라 되다다 라신이 찍마인데 지는 예라 되는 되면 되바 신데 힘대야 되면 되와 당시 되와 되와 당시 다들이 건지 지는 힘대 예라 되다 콜로드 지고리야 뒤차시 몽보여로 와 어디 노여나 셰는 힘다 찍리야 힘다 뭐 사도 그래서 레나 찍는 데로 힘다 찍으면 다 힘다 연라 찍이나 힘다 찍으면 나지 연라디에 배가 도도 찍으면 연라 면다 차고 말으시고로
야만이 찍으면 두마 차고 있어.
라
야만이 힘다 찍으면 나시 연라디게 찍은 거래. 야만이 연라 두마이면
힘다 뭐 차그래. 어때 내가 데려도 와. 좋아요. 힘다지면 되게 여러 남지 찍든 좋아. 당세. 시버보다 셔와 셔리 인지 찍도 좋아서 용요도 세. 다들 시버보다 세다 힘다데 될 말이다. 시디시 얘나들이 그 된자고 쉬어드려야 돼요. 와. 차 사진 소리다. 군이 찍이나 얘네 힘대 연락해야 돼. 요마로 찍으라고 해요. 어디 시버보다 레디 이 힘대 연락도 더칸데 되게 타데 넘셔요 말이지.
게다다들 각자 시버 자고 맞던데 이게 신다다 연락의 찍이나로 와게 신다 찍이 만나신 연락한가 찍 자고래 야만에 연락 두마이면 신다 두마 차올라 저러 와게 이 타니 원들라고 각자 제발 자고
단다들 찍인사들 피지 각자 셔 자고
알아 타가나 랍션 저러 와 just double checking. We are still on top of page 279, right after that citation. And so if a chariot and its parts were to be one, in the sense of identical. So I was asking Geshe, do we need a qualifying term, intrinsic existence here? He said no, right? Conventionally speaking, okay? If a chariot and its parts were to be identical, conventionally speaking, then there are these, fallacies would arise. Number one, just as a chariot is one entity, right? All its parts have to be just one. There cannot be many. Okay? Or just as its parts are many entities, a chariot has to be as many as its parts. If chariot and its parts were to be identical, like conventionally speaking. And so in which case, a chariot is the basis, right, for all these different parts. Then we cannot say, cannot talk about a chariot in its parts. If they are identical, a chariot is its parts, and its parts are chariots. So we cannot say a chariot has many parts. It has, it is, right? That's the issue, okay?
어디 가다 신다랑 얘가 뭐 저기 소소 members 다들 타데스야 되와 다들 가서 셔 자고 있는데
No.
그와 신다르다 얘가 이 타데와
No.
이나 랑 신지 타데 말이시
No, so.
소소 뭐인데 이는 본바다 가 남부나 희주다 남부스나 가와 지고래 가지 레메 동일에서는 이니 직 신다 덴사티야 직 딘덴주 얘가 샤요 말고 본바가 닌 저요 말와 어디 나이스.
And the second part of the analysis, the first one was, conventionally even speaking, a chariot is not identical with its parts, and nor are its parts identical with the chariot. If they were, then either all the parts have to be just single entity like a chariot, or the chariot has to be multiple entities like its parts, right? And that's not feasible. Okay, so that's part one analysis. The part two is where we use the qualifying term intrinsic reality. a chariot and its parts are not intrinsically separate or different, okay, different. And if they were, and then they would not have any kind of a dependent relationship with each other. We cannot talk about a chariot and its parts, because they would be as unrelated as a pillar and a vase. A pillar and a vase has nothing to do with each other, and it would be the same thing. But we must remember that conventionally, yes, a chariot and its parts are different, are separate conventionally, but not intrinsically. If they are intrinsically different, then they would have to be unrelated, with each other. They could not depend upon each other. Okay.
我这现在这没那边有没有吧？有些罗是，那这现在的原来因热气这边这个呢，这是个罗，他现在原来怕比赛的现在是一样不罗，这边是他有么罗？我这边的这那些这个是，那边有没有有些是，但现在大家的当时新闻都是个罗。但是这边说你呢，考上了说那个的，让人啦，那电的没了，人的啦，历经那个的，人了电的讲，没多是的不是，可是，电这边说你考上了这个，这边说是的那个的。现在人啦，对不对？人啦，现在对吧？你用过了完了，我这是个。考上这就是的，考上现在的那个的新竹市的意思的。的考上，考上了学呢是的，我学。但那个人啦呢，人啦呢，这点里面啦，是我的同性一点点吧的，看见他看有点是吧？但人的理解的话，但人啦呢，这了点讲。原来那么电呢讲，没得是人的些的比历史说里面的，考古说的白说的这些，原来那么的，但历经比人的历经可能的是吧？今天电话的要嘛的是，可是电呢讲没得，第二呢，让我你说有那知道了电没被削弱，所以现在可以我你说有呢。So
we are somebody in the middle of page 279, so if a chariot and its parts were to be intrinsically identical or different, the problem would be that then something has to be findable under analysis, right? But nothing is findable under ultimate analysis. So what happens then? If nothing is findable under ultimate analysis, then there's no even basis for the label or the name chariot, right? What is that label onto? Because there's nothing findable under ultimate analysis. So it loses that basis, right? Because conventionally speaking, a chariot is the basis, its parts are dependent upon it, and we'll put a label called chariot. But if something needs to be found intrinsically, ultimately findable, which is not the case, then you have no basis for imputation or labeling per se. So in which case, then it wouldn't work. Like other examples given is like a ball and a yogurt, like yokleft. I'm just kidding. And all the Devdada in a tent or something, right? We can talk about there's a tent under which Devdada is residing, or there's a yogurt in a yogurt container, so to speak, right? Because one is the basis, a container, and what's contained within content within in that, okay? But that could only be talked about conventionally, but not intrinsically. Intrinsically, there is no findable basis, in which case we can talk about yogurt, it's his container, or Devdada and his residence tent, or something like that,
Dendra Tangel tea in the shave show was a daddy the Beju Ningo days. Hinda in la debata, in la hinda de Ningo the one.
No.
Or this was that. Or did the Cursa Prince ten Damba, citizen, Pidgin Dick Terry Cursa. Tenju Chishu do Shagore.
No, sir.
Roju Major Dribble Guldengo, Jundrible Dengo Marwa.
Ale, no.
That take you Jundrible, the river Gulden, Ninga Potato.
No. So if you look conventionally at a chariot in its parts, right, a chariot is dependent upon its parts, and so do the parts dependent upon its chariot, right? So there is a mutual dependency, isn't it? They are mutually dependent upon each other. So that mutual dependence is, I think, in some sense, a unique assertion of Prasangika Madhyamikans. Okay, in the case of Sivatantrika Madhyamikans and maybe schools below, when they talk about dependent, it's a kind of one-way thing. If you look at the cause and effect, they would say that an effect or a result is dependent upon its cause, but they don't say that a cause is dependent upon its results. There's no mutual dependency. It's like a unidirectional dependency, right? A result or outcome is dependent upon its cause, but not a bidirectional dependence. The cause is dependent upon its result. But Prasangika would say that a cause and effect are mutually dependent upon each other. It's a two-way street, bidirectional dependency, right? That's a very unique to Prasangika assertion. Just a chariot is dependent upon its parts are dependent upon chariot. So there's a mutuality, dependency here.
Oh, did the legion is a Tongshin the Chave, Paland and Demba. Hindaya, Rava, they were doing Palanda, Legion so the Batida, Hinda young Rang Le Soso and Zugo Le Mizibi, Titandema Meadows, there was that lazy Palanda was lazy Palo Yoris, lazy Palans, you couldn't cover your own. That Hinda Yana, the Hinda Yana, the Kuranguchi mother, Hinda Pop in the Yana said that today Yomara.
No.
Today Yomara soon.
I don't know, so. Singapore Papine, Yana Yomas again, the Tanya one loves you, and the Gaza Jawar.
That Delta Jawar, that
Tanya
Tongyen Deba, Tongyen Deba Segura, Tongyen Deba said. The lazy northern Tongyen Deba, Nori, lazy dear.
No.
That Hinda in line the Mujiro, Shasha, Muji, Sharo, she's a sort of Yomara.
We are towards the bottom of page 279, where you see the example of Dev Dada, who owns an oxen. Let's make that buffalo. We live in the United States. So Dev Dada has a buffalo. So in the case of Dev Dada, just the name of a person, if he owns a buffalo, right, we can see they are very different, right? Who is the owner of the buffalo? Dev Dada, right? What is owned by him? A buffalo. Yes, a buffalo is there, Dev Dada is there. We can say that's not Dev Dada, that's a buffalo. This is the Dev Dada, not a buffalo, right? We can say that conventionally. But if a chariot, in the case of chariot in its parts, they are of the one nature, right? If you take its parts away, there is no chariot left per se, isn't it? A chariot consists of its parts. Altogether, the totality of that is what a chariot is. If you fragment it, take it away piece by piece, then there is nothing to be said, here's a chariot, right? If you look at the chariot, it's totality. We can say chariot. But if we kind of dismantle it, we can say like, oh, these are its parts. Chariot is still here. Like there's no chariot here. It's gone, right? So it's not the same as Dev Dada owning a buffalo, right? Not the same as that.
Maybe she rose to the Legion, no other than no Shevatar, Hinda Yana down them by a Merite, Raji Tateva, Kabi, and send the wrong moon you trouble lads, Dindu Tini, Ranshi Chigwe show in the Tian Naka Semishero, Star Legend now than they were sitting Gojiba, Legend now and them at the said Gojiba into the Watakoni Chigina in the Discord. That could Legend now and then Rea Marta, Tademi Chigredo, or this way. Taddy and Demet or Yakabuna Shiro, or Tinejiba, the Hutum, and they could now into the Omar, or this way.
So at the bottom of page 279, there's a mention of Devdada possesses his ear. So again, of course, Devdada, has ears, conventionally speaking, but he does not possess or he does not have, intrinsic ears, intrinsically existent ears. If he were to have such ears, and then the analysis is, are they identical? Or are they different, intrinsically speaking, right? If they're identical, then you cannot say Devdada has ears, because Devdada is ears. Ears are Devdada. There is no has, it is, right? And if they're intrinsically different, then Devdada and his ears would be just like Devdada and buffalo, They are two different, as we say, animals, right? We have social animals, right? So, yeah.
Gotcha. Della leggi no da deva zata yo mingo da hingda yang ra hingda yi rang yin la zhe yin rang cin yi zhe wen demo go se de da ji da leggi no da ba so me de demo se ga yo ro ta ni da de tong da ba ja ro de ne hingda da yin la de je de tong da be rang xi zhe ba se go ma de ji da hingda yin la me de se go ma ro.
Okay, so on top of page 280, so the main point is that, of course, Devdada has, ears or nose or whatever, conventionally speaking. Nobody's denying that, But, he does not have, he does not intrinsically have or has ears and nose, That's what's being refuted.
다 초랑만이 다 넘버 되는 초랑만이 되래 다 초좀다 초배 예비 다 시워든 가서 나딘 로사로 초랑만이 개도 초도 힘다 얘는 시원을 힘다 유수들한다 힘대 연락 소원은 힘다 샤슈이나 힘대 연락 그 시불신 야봉게 드디 힘다 예를 시고로 어디시가
And the fifth part of analysis is simply an aggregate of chariot's parts does not constitute a chariot, right? In which case, if we just simply heap up and put a heap of the chariot's different parts, then that has to be chariot. But nobody will call that a chariot, right? It has to be still fitted in, and it has to be made into a chariot, right?
마상을 초반나 힘담이 힘다 요원 조대 연락 소바 잠시 힘다 이베시 스타 봉해도 자는 힘다 요레베 다 무슨 노거리죠 어디 이 요마로 와스 직시 다 계란은 게 왔는데 런데고만 연락진이 메지 연락 대바전 대베 에네 됐다나 연락장 매원 조디스 때 연락이 메시로스 다 초소모도 로스케요 말고 소동레스는 나 신대 연락다 연락에서 다 된지야면도 로 소포진 거라면은
알라로
어디 소포 시작이 용 말아 어디
소포면 시작이 말아 So we are on page 280, the second paragraph, right after that citation from the middle way commentary. And what Geshe has explained is that a mere collection of the parts of a chariot does not, make a chariot, does not constitute a chariot. And if it were, then we should be able to find a chariot, in the heap of of its parts, but nobody's going to find that, so it's not that. And If there is no what called whole, then there cannot be parts, isn't it? Right? The collection, if there is no collection, then there cannot be collection of parts, because that's dependent upon a whole, and its parts are dependent, right? Are codependently existent,
다 신다 랑이나 소바자 임바 고발로 로본디 세 시베 체버 자무고 디세 자르 무고 디세 다들이 가자 신다 소좀디 에네 신다 소좀디 신다 말이슬라 뭐디 신다 소좀디 돈 때문에 신다 말이 자고 말이서 거라 신다 소좀 거나 지돈 신다 소좀 거나 신다 말아 돈도 셔 자고 면도 어디서 잘 먹을 속바 신대 다히 이메시로 저도 다히 더좀 예서 오라 저 속바 신다 마인데 속바디 신대 다히 이메시서 따다래 어디들 가서 자고 말이서 우리가 이메시로 풍부 속바 다히 임바 다히 임바 임베 다드 미로 송베소 게데 인라 속바서 신대 신다 문제지 예라 되는 dig비 뒤 예체버지 예체버디 신자 조냐는 내가 가르쳐봤다 예나제 매번 되베 예나제 매번 지 예나게 예점 신들 조버 미르소 시베 조니 켈랑버디 요 was습니다 다들 저들 신대 예베 예나야다 다 신대 예세다 거기 때는 바지 샤를 세우러 와 대신다 런기를 대대는데 이제 제일적이는 타디 있는 데미 도시 저 뭐지는 타디 데미지 그래라 어때입니다.
So we're in the middle of page 280, and where it is mentioned that when it is asserted that a chariot is not not a collection of its parts, that does not require the qualifying term ultimately or intrinsically, right? A chariot is not simply a collection of its parts, okay? If it were, if an aggregate of the parts of a chariot simply becomes a chariot, then we cannot talk about how to say, a distinction between a basis for labeling and what's labeled onto it, right? A collection of its parts is the basis for the labeled chariot. If the collection itself is a chariot, then there is no distinction between the basis and the label, right? Because they have to be same, which is not the case, what else did we say? And then the other thing is sort of restated the point is that as a part of this analysis, we say whether a chariot is intrinsically identical with its parts or intrinsically separate or distinctive or different from the parts, right? If in either case, it is not feasible because there is nothing. If they're identically one, well, then we cannot talk about chariot and its parts because chariot is parts and parts are the chariot, which is weird, right? But if they are intrinsically different, then they cannot be dependent upon each other. We cannot say a chariot has its parts, because its parts are as different as a pillar and a vase. They have nothing to do with each other, unrelated things.
어디 저랑 제도 소바자 신대면은 맞지 저거 어시다지 예라를 그래서 소바 메세다 한국자지 해야 된다 예 신대되는 예라 소소의 예이는 예라 소베 예 신대되 정스다 예라 예나 예라 소소의 예 되는 예라 소소의 선자 예 그 되게 서브라서 레레데와 뒤는 신다지 지금 말와 다 얘가 소베 되는 예다 당부터는 날 마지막 뒤에 예다 시에미 예위는 스타 얘가 소소에는 아니 소소 뭉셔버가지 마지막 내가 예드스거리 수딩니 예걸이야 예드스거 디 가린이스 나지 예다 먼저 예 신시 이 신시 있는 먼저 이니 당보다는 최레를 가서 최예 레라의 뒤에 제대로 신다 多了提醒喏是，但也开发也热热伊呢，那现在个的养老嘛，我有也的现在热热也的个正嘛这不，可能这不雄性这不热热也的呢，现在嘛不太么嘞，太个了，我就是我咋，去了养个，现在都的养老嘛不都是些，小小了，现在了。在咱那里现在有嘛？小是呢，说是特别干了，是吧？学生比教育多，是讲的也的，他的什么一点就个的，可是，这样俺嘛这个的，去这个推荐是碰了老少为是，碰上了他陪的是吧？教育就吧，老公过天大天去，碰是，碰老少的苦这么子一些的。也没这个，千万没别是，特别现在没把它这个这样，现在没完就是，现在也得说也得因此呢，因为新北菜的现代没得，这种这个菜的现代用法也得千万没别些，他们的也梦想的现在有把它就是，他们的刚刚这个呢现在没有它你那个多。
这地了搞这些把讲
哦对。
这个是吧？맞았네 딩에를.
네, 어제 제가 자고 말이.
자고 말로.
자고 말이.
알다 근데 그나게 내 차상식 한번 다 근데 입 대신다 인슬라비나 로바게.
어디.
아니 피게 차셔 되게 된 만디베 입 소소 받대 싱다를 왜 로바. 가가 딕베 입 대신다를 로바게. 만딩이 입 되게 되면은 내 망고 요만에 싱다 망고 태르고 쓰죠. 다 딕베 입 대인람네.
딕베 입 대인은 되죠. 다 단다. 내가 야 딕베 입 대인은 되죠. 얘도 많이 왔다. 얘라도 강가 때 마드베 내가 다 딕베 내가 얘라도 입서 요 말아. 그래서 디야데 그런 얘도 왜 딕디잖아. 그 가가래야 요 말아. 그 찍모도 요 말아.
그래.
그래서 정말로 그러시는 그 대스에서 저기도 되게 파 가서 다가 되게 그 가는 저 내야 요 말아. 그런 얘 다가 뭐 요 말아.
근데 그거처럼 입도 같이.
그거 쉬어야 돼. 그다 연락들이 얘 처음부터 그거 샤워로. 그래서 저 연락들이 시 있으던데. 그거다 연락들이 그거 샤워 말아.
러와 이네 강가 딩디 좀 입디 인람나
같게. 딩 다시 저때 마드베 내가 예서 이 디베 내가 될 인스. 저때 마드베 내가 될 인스나 디베 내가 신다 용공 마드베 내가 신다 메가 찍바레스라. 다 디베 내가 인세나 에네 디베 내가 뭐였다 연락 소소 체크해서 콜이 예 가져지 파 디디잖아 예 다가란 레그 연락 예 다가란 레그 마도 지금
입 셔마래
예 셔바고 디디잖아 당부 투비시 디디잖아 고고레용 말아 어디서 연락 레레 가지고다
아 레레는 그거 차요 강가 냠도 dom네 차대
이게 그거 차그러
어디 인람
다 레레라 아니 그 예문다 메나 시거다 예문다 메나 이 디빈 내가라 그 연락이 그런 얘도 당부 투기는 더 투기 되겠네 그거는 그거 대가는 되면서 태월해야 하면도 아시 어쩌면 이 세분내가 집어려도 그 예 연락은 줘야 합니다 디베 내가 예또 어디서 저거 다시다 연락 소소 예비나 디베 내가 채와 유에서는
알랄랄로 연락 코랑이 알레 sobda 마사베제 리베 이나 디차요 마살로 다이나 sobda 스웬이 차이 입데 인람나 가지고
sobda 스웬 다 디베 예 콘도 강가 노베 예데 셔거라 연락 소요
어디
틴다 속좀세야 되고
알레디 랑신
누구말와
I think there was something I wasn't following. I'm like, this is not making any sense to me. One part, not the whole thing. Now I got it. Why there was missing word there. Okay, so we are on page 280 to the bottom. You see there's objection and response to raise. So that's what Geshe has been explaining to me. And so if the critics claim, well, we don't say it, that the collection of the parts of a chariot is a chariot. But we say that, that distinctive shape, right, of a chariot, that is what the chariot is. Then a couple of questions are raised, right? Number one, so are you talking about the distinctive shapes of each of the parts of a chariot, or, or another, a different kind of a shape? Yeah. The first one is, that you were talking about the distinctive shapes of each part of a chariot, where we have a hub, we have the rim, we have the spoke, right? But then, a chariot becomes many chariots, right? Just like there are different shapes, right? Like a hub is different than the spoke, and the spoke is different than the rim, So then you have to accept that there are many chariots, which you wouldn't, right? I mean, that's how that part of the argument is refuted. And the second two is that I had difficult understanding what Geshe was saying for a while is, are you talking about a shape of a chariot that is the result of the distinctive shapes of each of its parts? That could not be the case because, the flat, whatever plank, right, it is not circular, right? It cannot make circular, or the rod is not going to be circular. So distinctive shape of each part of the chariot in and of itself, by themselves, cannot constitute a different shape, how should I say, cannot make a shape of a chariot. Okay, so that's why I know you are looking at me too. So I mean, as I was going back and forth with Geshe to what is this all about? Of course, when you shape the different parts like to fit into that makes a chariot shape, but not as it is, right? The distinctive shapes of each part of a chariot as it is cannot make a chariot because it has to be molded and shaped into a chariot, right? Yeah. So which shows there's a dependent arising. A chariot, is nothing but a product of many things, molding and shaping and fitting everything together. That is possible, but not, right, as the way they might assert. So anyway, we might continue this next time. We will stop there today, and it's a talk day, as I announced at the beginning. So we will draw a short dedication prayer, take a short break, set at the table, and do the talk. 我读的这个，那talk的情形，我给带不了，干嘛出小门？So next 2 weeks I will be out of town, so back to our translator Geshe. So go back to Kamabaya.